Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I am your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Tuesday, August 13th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start with a little bit of breakdown of the AP poll that came out yesterday, a number of things to break down with the poll, but also some history was made with it, and then some trends to watch throughout the season that we will get into in the first segment. Then we'll get into some prize and disappointing teams throughout this upcoming season in college football. I have one from each of the Power 4 conferences, one surprise, one disappointment. So we'll get into that in the second segment. Then we'll get into the biggest leaps that title contenders need to take this year. We've gotten into this the last couple of days. This will likely be the last day, but maybe I'll do one more, who knows. Then we'll get into a little talk around fall camp intel. We'll likely do this throughout the week. As you know, there were a ton of scrimmages this past week, a couple of injuries. I want to make sure you guys are fully updated on all of that before we get to a recruiting update to finish things out. And there is a unlikely team that is making some real noise in the recruiting world right now. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and you can use the GSMCpodcast.net link if that's easier for you. But also, we now have Super Chat. So on the Sports Network page, if you're in the chat, you can likely see a little $sign at the bottom of the chat. You're welcome to leave any question, any comment that you have in there, and I will absolutely have you. First of all, you'll see it on the screen, which is kind of a fun interactive thing for both of us here, but also it helps us out a lot. It's definitely a huge thing to keep the content that you love coming to you, so definitely a huge thing for us. If you would like to use that, you're more than welcome to. Also, we do still have the GSMCpodcast.net page if that's a little bit easier for you. But let's go ahead and jump right in here, and let's talk about the preseason AP poll that came out yesterday. Obviously, it's a preseason poll, so there's only so much you can take from it, but there are a couple of really interesting trends, a couple of history things that I want to get into, and definitely some interesting tidbits to pull out of this. But let's go ahead and jump in, and first let's just start with the poll. So it is Georgia, Ohio State, Oregon, and Texas. That's roughly the order that I expected them to go in. I think you could flip Texas and Oregon if you really wanted to, but that's the way I had it in mind, so more than fine with that. Georgia got the overwhelming number of first place votes, which makes sense. Again, a team with that type of quarterback, with that type of system, and the pedigree behind them, it's no real question, right? Then you have Alabama at 5, you got Ole Miss at 6, the same way that I had it, Notre Dame at 7, the exact same way that I had it. Then there's some difference. I did not have Michigan in my top 10. They have them sitting at 9, which we'll get to why that's a big deal here in a second. Florida State sneaks into the top 10 right there. Missouri right outside the top 10. Utah I'm obviously a little bit higher on than some people are. I do have them in my top 10 at that 8 position, but they do not. So definitely an interesting thing to watch there. Tennessee seems to be hanging out right in that 15 realm. Oklahoma a little bit higher on this list than I would have them, but at the end of the day, it's splitting hairs. Once you get down to this 15 to 25 mark, it's absolutely crazy the way you could put this. Miami a little bit low if you were to ask me. I believe I had them at 16 yesterday, and frankly I've seen people that have put them even higher. So definitely a team that has a lot of hype going into the season and expects to have a huge one. A&M makes the list. Arizona, Kansas, a little bit of run of Big 12 teams there, and then USC, NC State, and Iowa close it out. So a good group of teams here. Obviously roughly like what I had yesterday. I did have Iowa State in my top 25, so that's one team that I think likely should be in here. I think UCF is another team that could argue that they should be in here as well. So definitely some arguments around, who made it, who didn't, but at the end of the day, it's a preseason poll. Once the ball kicks off, we'll get a much better idea of how right this is, but there's definitely some things that I want to break down from this. First of all, in terms of the conference breakdown, SEC has 9 of these teams, Big 10 6, Big 12 5, and ACC 4, so SEC is really running away with this thing, with all the others kind of grouped together a little bit. The Big 10 and the SEC both have 4 in the top 5, or top 10, excuse me. So that would definitely kind of lean things a little bit more in the Big 10 direction. There's those 4 teams, and then not really sure what else happens after that. So definitely kind of it gives you an idea of how that conference is really shaking out going into this year. But let's get into a couple of different history things that were kind of made within this ranking, and there are a number of different things to break down here. First, we'll start with Michigan, the lowest rated reigning champion since the 2011 Auburn team that lost just about everyone, and Cam Newton was just about everyone. So definitely makes sense that they were all the way down down at 23, which is actually pretty wild considering today when even 9 looks a little bit low for the reigning national champion. So definitely some interesting things there. Obviously, Michigan, losing the amount of people they did, not overly surprising by any means, but definitely something that is really interesting and something to watch as we head into the year. Texas has its highest ranking since 2009. Oregon, highest ranking in program history. Ole Miss, highest ranking since 1970, all the way back then, so huge year for them. Ole Miss, highest preseason ranking since 2008. And Kansas, highest ranking since 2009. So a lot of teams making their highest point in a long, long time. Obviously, Texas has been well documented. We understand that this is a huge year for them and one where they feel like they're back at the table for the first time in quite some time. Oregon, obviously, is going into this year with as much hype as really has ever been around that program. Obviously, the Chip Kelly years were absolutely incredible, but there were a number of years where you still felt like there were a couple of teams at the end that they just weren't going to be able to deal with. That doesn't feel like the case this year. They feel like a team that can absolutely win a national title. Same thing with Ole Miss. Going all the way back to 1970 is pretty wild, but Ole Miss is a program and a team that has been sitting pretty dormant for a long time, but is very talented and obviously has a ton going into this year. Missouri coming off an incredible year last year. They are right where they should be. And then Kansas, kind of making their way up in the college football world. They used to be kind of a laughing stock of sorts, but they are finally where they should be, which is towards the top of this sport and back in the conversation. So very much like that team. Jalen Daniels' health is obviously the number one thing, but definitely will be an awesome team to watch. Also, we get a number of games between the top 10 preseason teams. We get 8 of the games throughout the season, and frankly, I tried to count these. I believe I got all of them. I'm 99% sure I got all of them, but Georgia plays number 4, 5, and 6 in these rankings, so gives you an idea of why people are a little bit worried about what Georgia can do this upcoming year. Ohio State plays 3, 8, and 9, so it's not like they get a really easy schedule to jump off of. Obviously, the other 9 games are not necessarily world beaters by any means, but when you play 3 top 10 teams going into the season, that's definitely going to be a tall order. Michigan could be a very different team by that time, but at the end of the day, these are 3 very quality teams on that schedule. Oregon obviously plays Michigan as well, a huge matchup, the one of the matchups that I'm circling likely the most as we head into this Big Ten season. And then Notre Dame and Florida State is the last one here. So this is obviously incredible. I think one of the coolest things here is November 2nd is going to be loaded. You have Oregon, Michigan, you have Ohio State, Penn State, you have Georgia, Ole Miss, and then you have October 12th, which is Ohio State, Oregon is the only one on here, but there's a lot of incredible matchups that day. LSU plays Ole Miss. We have we have Texas playing Oklahoma that day. So many huge games on that day. So love that these games are a little bit spread out. I do love that November 2nd is going to be kind of an incredible day, but overall, I think when you get a number of spread out games in a 12 or among the top 10 teams in the country, it's always a great thing. You can have that marquee game on the weekend and then fill everything else with the number of other great games that are happening pretty much every single week this upcoming year. So this is going to be absolutely awesome. I think these are the games that you'll look back on and say, these are likely the ones that define the college football playoff this upcoming year. Whether it's Georgia stumbling a couple of times in those 3 games, or Texas getting beaten by Georgia, or Oregon losing to Ohio State and Michigan, what have you. There's a number of games on here. Notre Dame playing Florida State might be the most consequential game of the year for them. So definitely going to be a huge number of games here. And if you expand it to the top 15, I believe you go all the way up to 15 games that you can see between the top 15 teams this upcoming year. And frankly, I could have missed a couple there as well. So definitely a huge thing there. The only top 15 team that doesn't play another top 15 team this year is Utah. So definitely a team to watch. It looks like their schedule is definitely leaning towards them, and it sounds like that's going to be exactly the case. So definitely will be a fun thing to watch. But let's get into some of the trends to watch throughout this thing, because it's obviously a preseason poll. You can't take too much out of it, but there's definitely some things to watch for throughout the season. And we'll start with, in 20 of the last 21 seasons, the preseason top 10 team has finished unranked in the AP poll. I think there's a number of options here. I think Michigan is likely the easiest pick of the group because of all the changes, because of all the people walking out the door, and the outside noise can't help by any means. So an 8-4 season would likely get them out of the top 25, and I think that's likely in the cards for Michigan. Not necessarily picking that by any means, but definitely something that could happen. Florida State is another team that I'm watching with if DJ does not hit the ground running the way they need to, they're a team that could lose to Notre Dame. They could lose to SMU. They could lose to Clemson and Miami, and that would put them probably outside the top 25. So definitely one to watch there. Notre Dame is still a little bit up in the air because the passing game is a little bit worrisome still for me. I think the offensive tackles have to come along in quite some way. So there's a world where it looks pretty ugly and disjointed, but the schedule definitely leans itself to them being a top 25 team at the end of the day. Ole Miss and Penn State are two teams that I don't expect to find their way into this category, but definitely could. Ole Miss faces a very, very tough schedule, and Penn State, that offense is going to look stagnant at some point, but if it looks stagnant throughout the year, then they're going to have a real problem on their hands. And then Alabama's the final team that I think this could realistically happen to. Maybe it happens to Texas or Oregon, but I wouldn't necessarily put a bet on that by any means. I think when you have all the changes at Alabama, there's always going to be that question, right? There definitely could be a fall off the cliff type season. I don't expect that by any means, but definitely is in the cards for Alabama this upcoming year. You also have all 10 teams to win a national title in the CFP era. We're ranked in the top 10 heading into the season. So if you're a fan of Georgia, Ohio State, Oregon, Texas, Bama, or Ole Miss, you feel pretty good about where you're sitting right now because history is in your favor. The thing about that is only one number one team as we go into the season has won the national title, which was 2017 Alabama, and they didn't even win the SEC. That was the year they lost to Georgia in the SEC, they didn't go to the SEC title. Why am I mistaking this? Yes, they didn't go to the SEC title and then found a way to beat Georgia in the championship game. So obviously, is going to be an incredible year. UGA being that number one team could spell a little bit of disaster for them. Obviously, I'm picking Georgia to go quite a ways in here, but did not pick them to win a national title. So both of these would hold up in my prediction. So definitely will be an interesting thing to watch. But there's definitely a ton going into this year. I think you look at this preseason poll, and obviously it's not the craziest thing in the world. We've seen these polls before, and a lot of them have fallen apart pretty quickly. But at the end of the day, there are a couple of trends that you really do want to watch throughout the season. You know, those top 6 teams winning the national title, that top 1 team not winning the national title is definitely something to watch as we head into this season. But we'll take our first break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the surprising and disappointing teams in this upcoming year. I have one from every Power 4 conference, so we'll break that down right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows where 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the most surprising we're about to talk about that. We just got into the AP poll, a number of things to break down from that, a couple of trends to watch as we head into this season, because it doesn't necessarily bode too well for the number 1 team, so Georgia, but bodes very well for the top 6 teams as we head into this upcoming year. But let's get into the surprising or disappointing teams as we head into this year. There are a number of teams that I want to get into. I have one surprising, one disappointing from each conference as we head into this year, and there's definitely some interesting picks on here, but I want to start with the SEC, and I want to start with the LSU Tigers. They are my surprising team this year. I think this one might not be all that surprising. I just think the way that they're going to go about business is going to be a little bit surprising. I think this defense is going to be a little bit better than some people are expecting, and there are a number of reasons that I'm buying into this team and buying into what they're going to do this year. The biggest reason is the O-line. I think when you have an O-line like that, that, there are so many things that could be not quite as good as it was a year ago, like the quarterback position or like the wide receiver position, but you could be much better on offense because the O-line was that good. Now, I don't necessarily think they're going to be much better on offense because there's not much place to go after last year, but definitely can be a team that can score plenty of points, I can promise you that, and I do think the defense is going to be a little bit better than people expect. I don't necessarily think they're going to be world beaters by any means or be top 20 or 30 in the country, but if they can get up to top 60, top 70 in the country, they're going to be able to make a lot or win a lot of football games. They're going to be able to score points. They have Kyron Lacey and CJ Daniels on the outside. They're one of those teams that I've seen be picked as the underachievers in the conference. I'm going the other direction. I think they have the ability to make a number of plays. I think Harold Perkins being used the right way is one of the best players in the country, and I think he will be used the right way. So it's a little bit of projecting. It's a little bit of, making sure or believing in this coaching staff. But at the end of the day, I do think this is going to be a very dangerous team. Is going to be one that will be in the playoff at the end of the year. As for a disappointment, I do have Missouri here, and it's frankly, I don't think Missouri is going to be a bad team by any means. I really like Missouri. I think Luther Burden is the best offensive player in the country. The thing is, a lot of last year had to do with a couple of different things, and one of the big-time things was the elite cornerback duo they had back there was huge for this team. And I think Drayden Norwood is going to be a great player. I think Toriano Pride Jr. is going to come along and be a really solid player for them. But when you look back at last year, there were multiple games that were decided because Chris Abrams-Drain was an absolute monster, or Enos Rakestraw made a huge play on the back end. And while I like the duo they have, I don't necessarily think it lives up to what they had a year ago. Also, I think a number of things just kind of went their way last year. It's not necessarily they were overly lucky by any means, but they did go 11-2 against a really tough schedule. I think a couple of things went their direction. I think that's likely going to go the other direction this upcoming year because that's usually how the luck works in college football. So this is a team that I think is going to be really good. I think they have the ability to knock off really any SEC team on any given weekend. The thing is, I don't know if they can string it together the same way they did last year, even with a fairly favorable schedule. So I don't necessarily love the Missouri Tigers heading into this year. I think they're going to leave 2024 with a little bit of sour taste in their mouth. Now let's head over to the Big Ten, and I do have Rutgers as my surprise team. This one was easy for me, if I'm being totally honest, because they have a Doak Walker Award-level guy in Kyle Mondegai, a very, very talented running back, someone that can straight up handle an offense, take over, and be an absolute dominating force. And I think when you look at this team overall, a Greg Schiano team is a couple of very, very important things, and the biggest one is discipline. They're going to play good defense. They're not going to commit penalties. They're going to wear you down with the run, and they're going to take their moments when they get them. So I do think this is a team that it's not going to be overly pretty. You're not going to turn on the TV and see what you saw from LSU a year ago, but you're definitely going to see some really fun football. There's no two ways about that, and I think it's going to lead to quite a few wins for Rutgers. They do have Ethan Kaliak-Manis, at quarterback, so that's a minor question for sure, but I think he's looked great in camp, and I think he's going to go into the season very confident and be more than fine running this offense. For a disappointment, I don't love this Washington team. I've been pretty open about that throughout this offseason. I think this is a good team. I think they have the ability to make some noise. I think Jedd Fisch is very talented, and Will Rogers is someone that could hit it big. I just tend to believe that's not going to be the case. I think Damon Williams Jr., the backup quarterback, is likely going to finish the season for them at quarterback because I just think this is a team that has lost way too much, particularly on the line of scrimmage. You have so many things to replace. You have so many things that are changing on the fly, and while I think Jedd Fisch is an incredible coach, I think there's just too much in the Big Ten this year for them to compete. I think USC is a better team. I think Nebraska is likely a better team. I think Rutgers could even be a better team this upcoming year. So Washington's going to be a good team. I think they're going to be a good program going forward with Jedd Fisch. I just think 2024 is going to be a little bit bump in the road and a considerable drop-off from what they had a year ago, obviously. It's not going to be a bad team by any means and definitely not going to be a bad program, but I just think it's going to get off to a weird start and kind of finish not necessarily the way that they want it to. For the Big 12, I have Iowa State as my surprise team. This one feels pretty easy to me as well. I do have them going to the Big 12 title game, so that would make sense. Definitely a team that I think is really, really dangerous. I think everyone looks at these Big 12 teams and they see, consistency, they see experience, and Iowa State has that in droves. But the thing is, they have two of the most electric wide receivers in the entire country. Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins are as dangerous as they come, and I think those two guys are going to be a problem for pretty much any defense that they face off against. Truly, they're going to be an absolute problem, and I think you look at someone like Matt Campbell, when you look back at that 2020 season where they had so much success and they did so many great things with Brock Purdy and all those guys up there, I think it's a lot like this team. It's not necessarily to the same level when it comes to experience at quarterback, but when you talk about the talent, Rocco Becht is really, really talented and someone that I expect to take a big-time step forward and really be one of the stories of college football this upcoming season. I think he's so talented and one of those guys that is going to, kind of take over the Big 12 this upcoming year. When you're talking about Shedeur Sanders and you're talking about Jalen Daniels and Avery Johnson, who I think is also going to have a great year, but when you're talking about all these other quarterbacks, I think Rocco Becht is plenty ready to make some noise this upcoming year. As for disappointment, I'm not buying into this UCF team the same way people are. And I understand there are people that really, really believe in what they did through the portal, and frankly, I do as well. I think they did a great job in the portal and added a ton of players that are going to have huge effects for this team, but I've been pretty honest with this across pretty much every team where you're adding a lot of portal players, it adds a lot of variability. And this is a team that was a good team last year, but wasn't near where they needed to be to win a Big 12 title. So I just think there's too much ground to make up. I don't necessarily think there's going to be overarching a bad team, but KJ Jefferson throwing the ball is not the most confident thing in the world. And if you can absolutely just sell out on the run, it's not going to be too hard of an offense to corral. Now, it is Gus Malzahn calling plays, so it could be much harder than I'm giving it credit for. But overall, I don't know if they have the guys on the defense. I don't know if they have the number of guys they want offensively. I think it is a team that is going to develop into an incredible one over the next couple of years. The program, is going to develop into quite an incredible program. But this year, I think they have a number of names on this team, but they're just not all the way there, putting it all the way together. So I just think with all of the competitive nature in the Big 12 this upcoming year, this is a team that's just going to get the short end of the stick for that one. ACC, I do have the surprise team being Georgia Tech. I think this is a team that everyone's going to be surprised by, frankly, because when you watch this team, it's going to look like a really good football team. And frankly, that's what they are. They just play a schedule that's an absolute nightmare. So we could get to the end of the year. Georgia Tech plays really good football for 12 games, but ends 7-5. That's just kind of the reality of the schedule that they play. And frankly, 7-5 would likely be a pretty good record this upcoming year. I do think this is a team that, led by Haynes King, is going to be very efficient on offense. So a defense, the last thing they want to do is to stay on the field. And that's what Georgia Tech does so incredibly well, is they chip away at you. They're not going to get, big chunk plays. They'll get them every now and then, but the main way they do things is RPOs, short dump-offs, just making sure that they keep the yards moving, keep the sticks moving, and really make defenses tired. So I think this is a team that makes life really, really tough for everyone, and definitely one that any given weekend can beat one of those big-time teams in the ACC and totally ruin their season. So I'm not saying Georgia Tech's going to go to the ACC title or anything crazy like that, but there's a game or two in this schedule that they could absolutely just be the story of the weekend, that's for sure. And disappointment, I do think Louisville is going to be a little bit disappointed, and I feel fairly good about this one, weirdly enough. I do think this is a good team, and I think they did a number of things through the portal that were really solid. The D-line is going to be great, led by Ashton Gillette, and then you have the wide receiver core where they brought in Colin Lacey. Definitely going to be a fun group. I don't love Tyler Shuck. I don't think it's nearly the player that Jack Plummer was, particularly in that offense that Jack Plummer knew so well. Tyler Shuck does not know it that well. Now, he's definitely made a number of strides, and when he's on the field, he plays pretty good football. He hasn't been on the field nearly enough for me to feel fully confident in this team. I think another team like Missouri that just had a number of things go their way last year. Not a bad team last year by any means, a very, very good team, but one that got a couple of breaks. There's no two ways about that, and I definitely think in the grand scheme of the ACC with so many teams that are right around Louisville this upcoming season, I just think they're going to fall behind the NC States, the Virginia Techs, the SMUs at the end of the year. So I do think after a really impressive 2023, I think 2024 for Louisville might just be a little bit of a step back. Overall, it's impossible to figure out these teams, right? There's so many variables going into this season, so many teams that have a chance to make some noise that there are a number of teams I just put as disappointing that could easily be surprising and vice versa. So definitely will be a really interesting thing to watch, but there are some teams I'm just not fully buying into and some teams that I'm watching very, very closely as we head into this year. I think it's going to be just an incredible year, and I think there will be plenty of surprising and disappointing teams as we in 2024, that's for sure. But let's take our second break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about some of the biggest leaps title contenders need to take. We've done this the last couple of days, knocked through the top 10. We'll go a little bit deeper. I think this might be the last edition of this, but maybe I'll feel like I want to do another one tomorrow. Who knows? But let's break that down right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the different surprising and disappointing teams as I see it heading into this year. Obviously going to be a very crazy year, so it could go any which way, but I do feel pretty good about the picks that I just made. As we head into this year, we have a number of different things to talk about, and the biggest thing is what leap do these teams need to make? What do the championship level teams need to do better than what they did in 2023 to lift that trophy, possibly again in 2024 in the case of our first team here? So let's get into Michigan, and frankly, is a hard one to pick because Michigan won the national title. So if they did exactly what they did last year, they're likely right back in that position this upcoming year. But they changed a lot. There's no two ways about that. A lot of the questions as we head into this year are things that changed from last year to this year. So definitely not necessarily the same type of vibe among this team. Not the same vibe from this team to other teams, excuse me for that. But I do think one area that they could improve and one area they could hit another level in is explosivity. I think that's the big thing that this Michigan offense is just missing just a little bit. And frankly, I think they're a little bit more equipped to do that this upcoming year on the ground more than anywhere else. I think when you have someone like Alex Orji that can run the ball to the level that he can, there's always that chance you're going to break one free, right? And then Donovan Edwards has that more breakaway speed than Blake Corum did. Him being on the field more is obviously going to lend that self to that. And then you obviously need some wide receivers to step up. You need some things to happen in the passing game for this to happen. But at the end of the day, I do think Michigan's going to be not necessarily as efficient of an offense because of the passing, struggles of Alex Orji. And I think one of the big time questions is how do they kind of combat that? How do they deal with that on the other side of it? How do they kind of handle all of the different changes to their offense? I think one of the big ways is you can change a game in a second. If you can get behind defenses every now and then, it's almost exactly what Alabama did a year ago, where the offense looked a little bit weird at times, but once they got a big-time play, the game totally changed. So that was kind of the big-time thing for them. Maybe it's the same thing this year. Alex Orji, obviously not necessarily the level of passer that Jalen Milroe is, but definitely could be a huge help to this offense that I expect to take just a little bit of a step back, but if you can hit those big plays, it doesn't look too bad by any means. I also think when you look at Missouri, when you talk about big-time quarterback play, when you talk about those big games that you need Brady Cook to show up and he needs to make big plays, he came up a little bit short, whether it was from accuracy or throwing picks. He threw a pick in every single one of the big-time games they played throughout last year, so definitely something that they're going to have to fix, whether it's the only game that he didn't throw a pick in a ranked game is that Kansas State game in the beginning of the year. He had 2 against the LSU back end that was not good at all last year, so definitely not necessarily the greatest sign. And I think when you look at this Missouri team, they're fine with a 10-2 season. I think that puts them in a good position to make the playoff. It puts them in a good position to do some of the things that they want to do going forward. But the reality is you want to win those big games. You want to go into the playoff knowing that you can win that one game to push yourself into that second week and possibly give yourself a chance to go on a little bit of a run here. And you need your quarterback to play just a little bit better in those big time moments. So that's kind of what I'm really watching for him. I think he's a very talented player, but maybe he just needs a little bit more play in those big time games throughout the season. Then we'll go over to Clemson and we'll talk about offensive rhythm. That's the biggest thing that I think needs to change, and this was overall a pretty easy one. When you talk about what happened last year, Cade Klubnik looked a little bit lost. There was a number of times where it felt like they were running the ball really well, then tried to take a couple of shots and it looked weird, or they just had no real rhythm on offense, no real vibe on offense where you knew exactly what you were going to do, or you knew kind of the rhythm of things that you wanted to go about and in the game. And I think obviously this had a lot to do with the wide receivers not necessarily being at the level they want them to, Garrett Riley and Cade Klubnik not being on the same page, the O-line not playing as well. So a number of things went into this, no doubt about that. But I do think this is a team that has the talent to make defenses guess. They have the talent, whether it's, Phil Maffa at the running back position, some of the talented freshmen they have at wide receiver, a number of those things. I think, frankly, this is a big-time reason that they lost those big games last year, like Florida State, NC State, Miami. They didn't have that rhythm on offense, and it made them come up really short at the end of those games where Florida State was able to make those big plays. Clemson didn't have it in them. So definitely something to watch as we head into this year, and I think it's one of those things that they're a very capable team offensively. There's no two ways about that. They have a great play caller. They have really talented players at pretty much every single position. They got to put it all together, and that is much easier said than done. Definitely something that they're going to have to deal with, and if they can put it together, if they can become a potent offensive attack, this is going to be a really tough team to beat. I can promise you that, because it is a really, really good defense. But on the flip side of that, it could be another year where Cade Klubnik and Garrett Riley just aren't on the same page, and then you're probably getting another disappointing year in Clemson. So definitely something to watch there. But over to Tennessee, this one's another layup. They need better quarterback play. Everyone understands that what happened last year was not up to the standards that they wanted to, and Joe Milton came into the year with a good amount of hype, after that bowl performance that he had that was just really incredible in a number of different ways. He came back and everyone was thinking maybe he's finally put it together. Maybe all the physical tools that look so great when he's passing against air finally look incredible in game. That wasn't necessarily the case. He missed a lot of spots. He did kind of what we've known Joe Milton to do, and he's doing a little something different up at New England right now, which is definitely something interesting to watch. But overall, you look at Nico Iamaleava as we head into this year, he's just got to be more consistent. He doesn't necessarily have to take the top off every single play. He doesn't necessarily even have to play Hendon Hooker 2022 level football. He's just got to hit his spot more often than Joe Milton did. He really just has to hit these guys in the numbers and make sure that they can get out in space, because this wide receiver group is as special as there is in the country. They can compete with really anyone around the league, but if you don't have that quarterback that can put the ball on the spot when they need to, you're not going to do anything. That's just the reality. Now, this is a very talented kid, and frankly, I think if I asked any Tennessee fan right now if you're worried about the quarterback play heading into this year, the answer would be a resounding no. But at the end of the day, you are heading into your first year as a full-time starter. There's a lot of different things changing, not necessarily the easiest schedule in the world, although not the world-beating schedule that they've had to play in the past. So definitely will be a really interesting thing to watch. I think this is a more than capable kid, and I think is going to develop into one of the best quarterbacks really to ever come through Tennessee, honestly. But at the end of the day, it is still his first year. It could be one that you get a little bit of a boost in quarterback play, but not quite the amount that you need to possibly make an SEC or title run this upcoming year. Then we have LSU, and this is another big-time layup. The back-end defense has to be so much better. They are fully equipped to possibly fix that this upcoming year, but the question is how much do they fix it, really more than anything else. I think Ashton Stamps is going to be a really good player for them, playing really well throughout fall camp. I think Javian Toviano, as long as he is on the field, still some lingering off-the-field things with him, but if he's on the field, he's going to play good football. I think Sage Ryan just has to play passable at cornerback. I don't think he's going to be the guy that they're fully relying on to make all the plays out there, but he's got to be able to make some. Major Burns could make some noise. PJ Williams, the very talented freshman, might just be a starter at one of those corner positions, which isn't necessarily the greatest thing in the world, but also when you look at last year, probably the right way to go about business. Jordan Gilbert is someone on the back end at free safety, and then Jordan Allen at the strong safety position. Both those guys have to be huge. When we talk about, we talked about it yesterday, where safeties are more and more important in the college football world with all of the different coverages you have to, assume, and then all the different route combinations, motions, all of the different things that happen. You got to be the security blanket on the back end of that defense. You have to be the communicator in a lot of ways, and those two guys will have a ton on their shoulders this upcoming year. So I think this is a group that really has a number of guys that can make some plays. Now, last year they didn't make those plays, so it can't make you feel too confident in the group. But overall, I do think they have guys to make it happen. They're just walking a bit of a tightrope this upcoming year in that respect. I do think when you talk about Miami, it's all about decision making. Frankly, I think this team has so many different things in place, and there are a number of things from last year that they have to get a little bit better at. Quarterback play, back-end defense, or a number of things. I think they've done a great job with that, but there were games that were straight up lost by time management decisions, by coaching decisions, and that can't happen this upcoming year. If you're going to compete on a really high level in the ACC title or in the playoff or possibly in a national title, you need a head coach that's going to keep his wits about him and not going to make the mistake that Mario Cristobal made a number of times throughout his career, most notably against Georgia Tech a year ago, where I don't know what was going through his head when he made that call, but at the end of the day, that has to change this upcoming year. And it comes down to a number of different things. Him just being a little bit more adept in the time management, that type of thing, but also just trusting the guys around you. You have two very, very good coordinators. Shannon Dawson is one of my favorite OCs in the entire country. Hand it over to them. Allow them to do what they do, which is call plays, which is manage some of the things that Mario Cristobal has not necessarily shown that he's great at managing in the past. So overall, you look at this Miami team, and there are a number of things that they have to do better on the field than they did last year. There's no two ways about that. If they want to reach the heights that they did, they got to play better at quarterback. But they went out and got Cam Rising. They have to be better on the back end. They went out and got Michael Powell. They have a very talented freshman. So there's plenty there from a roster perspective. But at the end of the day, none of that really matters if your head coach or coordinators cannot make the decisions that they very much need to make down the stretch of games. So overall, I think you look at all these improvements and you look at all the different things that need to change for these title contenders, and they're pretty small for the most part. There's not necessarily huge things that they need to get, leaps and bounds better at, unless you're talking about LSU's back-end defense. But overall, I think there's a number of things to like about all of these teams. There just needs to be tweaks here and there. There needs to be some things that last year was a weakness, this year not so much. So definitely something to watch as we head into this year. That'll likely do it for this segment. I think that is likely the teams that I think have a real shot to win a national title, but if a couple come across my brain in the next couple of days, I will definitely include them in another segment. But let's take our third break here, and when we come back, we're going to do a little bit of a fall camp intel, break down even more scrimmage notes throughout the country. Frankly, we'll likely do it tomorrow too, because there's still stuff coming out from pretty much every single camp across the country. So we'll break it down right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the improvements that need to be made for title contenders as they head into this year. Definitely some big time things to watch throughout this season as we head into what's going to be a pretty wild year with a number of title contenders around. But let's get into some fall camp intel. There's still scrimmages going on all around the country. It went on this weekend, but still a number of things coming out from those scrimmages all around the country. And we'll start in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, where things are going really well. I'll be totally honest with you. When you get into this season, there's so many questions around Alabama, and frankly, I still have plenty of questions about that defensive side of the ball, but the offense is coming along, and that is a huge, huge piece of news for Alabama fans. Ryan Williams and Caleb Odom, two very talented freshmen. Caleb Odom came in as a tight end. I think he'll likely move to wide receiver and work more out on the outside. both of them are incredibly talented and are going to be really, really hard to keep off the field. And frankly, that's a theme that you'll see throughout this segment. There are a number of guys that are making quick impressions in fall camp. Jeremy Bernard is an absolute dude at wide receiver as well, definitely making waves and figures to be the top guy this upcoming year. Definitely someone to watch there. Jalen Milroe seems like he's coming along pretty nicely, putting everything together. The run game seems like it's going to be really, really good, and frankly, that's no surprise to really anyone. When you have the group that they have, it's pretty incredible what you're capable of doing. I think he's going to have to get a little bit further down the road when it comes to throwing the ball, but overall, he looks like himself. He looks like the guy that you want him to look like, and maybe take a little bit of a step forward, but we won't really know until we get on the field at the end of the day. And it sounds like the quarterback depth is a little bit better than some of us might have thought going into the season. It sounds like Ty Simpson is ready to roll. Austin Mack is there as well, so I'm not necessarily super worried. Obviously, Jalen Milroe going down would not be great at all by any means, but it sounds like they have people behind him that could pick up the slack if that were to happen. Moving over to Oklahoma, it sounds like they have a little bit of reason to worry in Norman right about now. The offensive line has obviously been the thing that everyone's worried about, but Jackson Arnold has had some turnover troubles throughout fall camp, and it's something that goes back even to last season. You saw the performance against Arizona was not what he wanted by any means. Threw, I believe, 3 picks, had a fumble, was not the prettiest performance by any means, and I think it's a year where he's going to have to take care of the football. This defense is coming along incredibly well, which we'll get here into in a second, but at the end of the day, this is a kid that really just needs to execute. He doesn't need to do anything overly special, but if he's going to turn over the ball, they're going to be in a really tough position this upcoming year. The defense is coming along exactly the way Brent Venables wants. Danny Stutzman, in fact, had a pick against Jackson Arnold, I believe a pick 6 in their scrimmage this past weekend, and I think Brent Venables was close last year. I think he had the guys that he wanted, at least relatively. I think this year, these are the guys. These are the guys that he wanted. This is his team at the end of the day, and he's ready to roll with this defense. I think it's going to be a really, really good unit led by Danny Stutzman, so a really fun team that, frankly, might just be winning games a little bit ugly this upcoming year. Moving over to Auburn, the quarterback position is an interesting one because Peyton Thorne is playing pretty good football. He's doing exactly what you want him to do, but the quarterback depth is not what they want it to be at all. You know, Walker White is there, but he's likely the backup, and he is a true freshman. He is likely not ready to play SEC football right now, so you really need that guy healthy, and that doesn't even answer all the questions they have at quarterback. You need Peyton Thorne to play a little bit better football than he did a year ago. Now, both line of scrimmages look really strong. The offensive line being strong is obviously huge for Peyton Thorne. The defensive line being strong changes the game for Auburn because that was an area, at least over the past 5 years or so, where they were getting pushed around a little bit, or at least more than they should be. And if that was going to continue, they were going to have a big-time problem as they head into this year. But it looks very, very strong, and the wide receivers look incredible, as you would imagine. There are a number of freshman wide receivers that are making noise at Auburn, whether it's Perry Thompson or Cam Coleman in your picture right there. But the guy I want to talk to you about is Bryce Cain. He's someone that has made a number of different headlines throughout the last week, as he had an incredible scrimmage this past weekend, apparently. So it could be Auburn just entirely leans on freshmen. Now, they do have Keandre Lambert-Smith, who is likely going to be one of their top guys next to Cam Coleman, but overall, it might just be a lot of freshmen catching passes for Auburn this upcoming year. Another guy to watch is Kieron Crawford, a very talented linebacker. He's turning heads, came over from Arkansas State, so a little bit of a step up, but definitely is turning heads and could easily play a role this upcoming year. Over at Florida, they did have Montrell Johnson go down, which is obviously a huge deal, but it sounds like they feel really good about the running backs they have behind him. Trayon Webb is a very talented kid. Jacoby Jackson is the one that is getting a ton of headlines. He is really making some noise and likely will have to play a big role, at least early in the season, as they work Montrell Johnson back into the lineup. The not-so-good thing is the offensive line. It sounds like the offensive line is not where it needs to be, and frankly, when you're talking about a quarterback like Graham Mertz, not necessarily the best at extending plays and getting out of pressure. So you're going to need to keep him upright. And the way you do that is protecting him a very, very good amount. And frankly, you're walking into a buzzsaw in week 1 if your offensive line is not ready. Whether it's Ruben Bain or Tyler Barron or some of the other guys that have popped up over the last little bit. Akeem Isidore is another one to watch. So they'll get dominated if they're not ready walking into that game. And right now, it doesn't sound like they're ready. So definitely something to watch as we head into that first week and over the next couple of weeks, see if they can make some strides that they desperately need to make. Over at Georgia, frankly, there's not too much to take away from this scrimmage because so many guys sat out. Carson Beck and a number of the other starters were not playing in this game, and frankly, I do not blame Kirby Smart one bit. You do not need to see anything from Carson Beck at this point other than him being on the field in week 1 and on the field every single week going forward. So not necessarily overly crazy there, but there were some things to pull away, that's for sure. Edge rushing looks just incredible this upcoming year. Looks like it is going to take the step forward that it very much needs to from last year. Gabe Harris is a name to watch, a very young player that is kind of breaking out slowly throughout fall camp and definitely could this upcoming year. Michael Williams, Jalen Walker, Damon Wilson, and plenty of others will play big-time roles coming off the edge, but they seem to feel really good about that position. And then Roderick Robinson is someone that has gotten just as many rave reviews as you could possibly imagine, and there's going to be a number of linebackers that meet him in the hole and do not like it by any means. He's an absolute dominating force and someone that is going to run through you. He's not going to run around you. He's not going to juke around you because he doesn't need to. He's about 240 pounds and is an absolute monster running the ball. So very much like Roderick Robinson, I think he's going to play a huge part in this offense right there next to Trevor Etienne, Then we have Clemson going right back to the freshman wide receivers. Bryant Wesco is a name that we all know, definitely one that has made some noise, but TJ Moore showed up in summer and has already made some noise in this offense. Definitely both of them will play big-time roles in this upcoming year. They do still need some of those veteran wide receivers to come along a little bit further, but overall, looks like the duo they got from high school looked just incredible to start. And then you have a couple of guys on the defense that have gotten shouted out by some big-time guys on that defense, where you talk about Wade Woodaz and TJ Parker highlighted a couple of freshmen in that group. Sammy Brown and the guy on Sammy Brown, the very talented linebacker, and the very talented corner, Ashton Hampton, is the guy that I really want to talk about here. A very talented kid, and frankly, the back end is the part of this defense that I'm worried about the most, and I'm not too worried about it, to be totally honest with you, but if a freshman cornerback can come along and play some really good football for them, that obviously helps. So Ashton Hampton is a name to definitely watch. It sounds like Dabo Swinney wasn't overly happy with the way that the scrimmage went. It's not necessarily like everything went wrong, but it sounds like he wants a little bit more from his team as they get closer to the season, and definitely will be something to watch as we get a little bit closer. Florida State, the defense is going to be incredible. This defense is one of the best units in the entire country, and it's not just a guy like Patrick Payton, who frankly is an absolute monster, but Saheem Brown is the guy that I want to talk to you about. He is making all types of plays on the back end, frankly is playing like a first-round NFL draft pick, an elite player for them on that back end, and someone that really came along a long ways last year, but if he can take another step forward, this back end is going to be downright terrifying. I'll be totally honest with you. It does sound like DJ U is just kind of executing. He's doing the things that he needs to do. It's kind of a little bit up and down as we kind of expected with some of his history, but overall, it sounds like he's doing just enough. I don't know if it's going to be the explosive offense that they had a year ago with Jordan Travis, but as long as he can execute this thing and that defense can can stay off the field for at least a normal amount of time, I think they'll be more than fine. It sounds like Malik Benson is his go-to guy right now. Kyle Morlock is someone to watch at tight end. And then you have really young guys that are making some noise. Elijah Moore is definitely a name to know. Amari Williams is a tight end / edge, so kind of that Nick Harbor type vibe. A very, very talented player that maybe he gets on the field a little bit this year. Maybe they wait a little bit for him, but right now, it's sounding like it's kind of hard to keep him off the field. But then finally, let's talk about Iowa, because I'm sure a lot of you have seen the stat line from Cade McNamara, and it was not pretty by any means. He went 7 for 21, 20 yards, a pick that was a pick 6, 1 fumbled snap, and no touchdown. So not where you want to be by any means, and kind of where Iowa has been the last couple of years. But it sounds like one of those things that it was something that Josh Pate was talking about on his show, where maybe it's a blessing in disguise. I don't necessarily think Cade McNamara is a bad player by any means. We saw what he did at Michigan. He obviously is capable of playing good football. The issue is they need someone a little bit more dynamic. And I think Brendan Sullivan, the kid that's sitting right behind him that came over from Northwestern, might be that guy. Now, he's not necessarily an electric runner. I'm not necessarily saying he's going to be an absolutely electric player that's going to totally turn this offense around. I just think he gives you a little bit more ability than Cade McNamara does. I don't think it's necessarily this massive gap, but Iowa needs anything that they can get. So I definitely think this could be one of those things that Cade McNamara was not necessarily going to be the best choice at the end of the day, and moving on to someone like Sullivan could be huge thing for this Iowa offense. So overall, a ton of things still coming out. Frankly, we will likely do another segment tomorrow on this because there are so many things coming out, a couple of injuries coming out. In fact, Texas just suffered another running back injury, which we'll get into tomorrow, but a number of things to break down, and we'll continue breaking it down throughout this week. But let's take our final break here, and when we come back, we're going to do a little bit of a recruiting update. A team that you have not heard about a lot in the recruiting trail is making some real noise, and we'll get into that right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the fall camp updates from around the country. Definitely a lot of things going on, and Iowa had not a great performance from their quarterback in their spring scrimmage, which I'm sure a lot of you saw, but let's get into let's get into segment 5 here, and let's talk about recruiting and Georgia Tech being the team that is the talk of the town in recruiting right now. So let's get into this, and let's break down a couple of commitments before we get into Georgia Tech. So Jim Coeli is a very talented 4-star safety that LSU just picked up. A huge pickup for them, 6'3", 210, a very talented, already college football built safety there. A very talented kid, and another reason why Corey Raymond was hired by this staff. A huge player in the world of recruiting, and definitely someone that is going to at least put their back end in a better position from a talent perspective. Definitely going to add to that, and has already started with a really big-time pickup there. Also, Philip Wright III has committed to LSU, a very talented 6', 170 wide receiver, runs a 4.3 240, a very talented kid, has a track offer from LSU as well, so Cortez Hankton's going to have plenty of fun with him, and definitely one of those things that as long as Cortez Hankton is in Baton Rouge, they're going to have a really good wide receiver class. I can almost promise you that, and I really love this pickup because I think it adds a certain element to this offense that has been missing a little bit. Obviously, Malik Neighbors did plenty of this, but having a speedster you can throw end arounds and that type of thing too obviously opens up an offense, and I think this is a fantastic pickup for them. Another wide receiver to watch is Isaiah Mosey, a very talented guy, 4-star wide receiver. He has flipped his commitment from Oregon to Nebraska, a 6', 200-pound wide receiver. Definitely a very talented kid out of Missouri, so a little bit closer to home than he was going before. A huge flip for Nebraska, and one that is another decommitment for Oregon. Adds to Josiah Sharma that committed to Tennessee, and Deshaun Bram, a very talented tight end that committed to, Josiah Sharma committed to Texas, a very talented defensive lineman, and Deshaun Bram committed to Tennessee, a very talented tight end. So a couple of decommitments from Oregon. Definitely have to get back on track on the recruiting trail, but frankly, they gave themselves a little bit of leeway with the talent that they brought in the first couple of days in that cycle. So definitely something to watch there, but overall, I'm not super worried about Oregon on the recruiting trail right now. Jonte Gilbert is someone to watch, a very talented corner. He is committed to Georgia, 6'1", 187, a very lengthy, tall guy that can definitely make some plays. T-Rob, Charvarius Robinson, is making tons of big-time commitments on the as the DB coach at UGA. Definitely a huge pickup, one of the bigger pickups of the entire offseason when it comes to head coaching, or when it comes to position coaching, So a very talented coach, and he's bringing in very talented players. A huge pickup for them, and beat out some interesting teams. NC State, Georgia Tech, and UCF. So definitely a big time pickup there, and one to watch as we head into the next couple of years for UGA. Kadarius Riddick is another talented back-end player, a safety 4-star that has flipped his commitment from UCF to USC. Now, earlier he flipped his commitment from Auburn to UCF, so there is a possibility that happens again, but this is a little bit further down the road. A very talented kid, definitely one that USC very much needs, and they continue to add to that back end. That is obviously DeAnton Lynn's kind of bread and butter, so not necessarily overly surprising, but definitely a very, very talented kid, and one that might just be called on to play immediately when he shows up on campus, frankly. Finally, let's get to the big-time commitment. Josh Petty, a 5-star interior offensive lineman, has committed to Georgia Tech, and that might sound a little bit crazy, but that is actually what happened here. A 6'5", 265 interior offensive lineman from Roswell, Georgia, right around the Atlanta area. Not overly surprising there, but this is the second highest recruit Georgia Tech has ever gotten. That is absolutely insane. Calvin Johnson was number 1, so if he's anything like that, they have to feel pretty good about this one. And frankly, I think a lot of people are surprised by this, and I was a little bit surprised, don't get me wrong, but at the end of the day, Brent Key is a fantastic offensive line coach. That's his bread and butter. That's what he did in college. That's what he did at Alabama, and he did a great job doing it. So it's not overly surprising that an elite offensive lineman would want to play for an elite offensive lineman head coach. It's kind of like Travis Hunter wanting to go play for Deion at Jackson State. It might not make sense as a school. It makes sense from a head coaching perspective. So he's going to get a great coaching staff, a great education, obviously, and Georgia Tech is doing a really, really good job of selling what they have there. You know, it's not what Georgia is. It's never going to be what Georgia is because of some of the academic requirements and some of the different things that go into that there. But at the end of the day, Brent Key's message is working. And if it's working, then this could be a very, very interesting thing to watch over the next couple of cycles, because if they shut down Atlanta, if they do better work in Atlanta than they have done over the last couple of years, this can develop into a really good team pretty quickly. I promise you that. So definitely something to watch. But let's move over to 2026 real quick and break down some big-time commitments there. Cody Green is an offensive tackle, elite player in 2026. He is committed to Oregon. This is a big-time pickup for them. Obviously, that 2026 class is coming along very nicely for Oregon. They're number 1 in the country right now, and building up the trenches is really where Oregon does most of their work. They're building kind of that SEC roster out in the Pacific Northwest, and this is just another addition to that. So a huge pickup there. A long time till he has to sign, but definitely one to watch there. And then we have Keenan Britt, a very talented 4-star edge rusher. He is committed to South Carolina, a huge pickup for this team, and frankly, the edge rushing recruitment has been incredible under Shane Beamer at South Carolina. They got Nick Harbor, who now is playing a little bit more wide receiver, but could easily move over to edge and be a monster. Dylan Stewart is an elite edge rusher that's going to be a freshman this upcoming year, and they're continuing rolling with Keenan Britt, a very good pickup here, and one that will definitely be a factor pretty much immediately when he steps on the field in Columbia. So one to watch there, but let's get back to a couple of scheduled commitments, a couple of intel as we head into this crazy month that's going to unfold in front of us. And I want to start with Christian Garrett. He is decommitted from Georgia, a very talented 6'4", 270 D lineman out of Bogart, Georgia, so right in that Athens area. A very talented top 5 D lineman in the 25 class, so definitely someone people want. And he's already gotten a crystal ball to Georgia Tech, so another one for Georgia Tech that they could be picking up that, frankly, they would not have a shot to pick up in other cycles. A big-time thing for them if they're able to close this one out, but they got a crystal ball from Steve Wiltfong, so you got to feel pretty good if you're Georgia Tech right about now. As for UGA losing this commitment, I think there are a number of things at play here. More than anything else, I think Elijah Griffin and Justice Terry might just be knocking on the door. And it's not to say that this kid isn't plenty talented and definitely can be a factor for Georgia in the future, but at the end of the day, when you have Elijah Griffin and Justice Terry on the sidelines, you might just want to make a little bit of room for him. I'm not saying that Christian Garrett was told to decommit, but I wouldn't necessarily be surprised if that's exactly what went down. But definitely something to watch. Anthony, definitely a couple on the list. I'm not sure if there's any that I have here, but I will absolutely do another one later in the week to break down a couple of the big-time commitments coming up. So don't necessarily have a Miami-Georgia battle, but I have a couple of Miami battles right here. Ben Hanks Jr. is someone to watch. He is down to three schools, a 6'1", 170 corner. He's from Miami, Florida, a top 70 recruit, top 10 corner in this upcoming class, so a very talented guy. it sounds like it's going to be Florida. He's down to all of the Florida schools, so not necessarily overly surprising there, but a big-time pickup for Florida if they can make this happen. Miami is still very much pushing for this one, but it sounds like Florida is definitely setting the pace here and likely will be the team that gets that commitment. Also, you have Jamie French, one to watch here. He is down to 4 schools, them being LSU, Texas, Miami, and Tennessee, all very, very good schools that are all very much in this thing, but at the end of the day, it seems like more and more buzz is going in the direction of Texas. I think Miami is definitely the team to watch here. They are pushing very, very hard, and there's plenty of time between now and the 30th to make this thing happen, but overall, I do think it's going to be the Longhorns. They just got another crystal ball, I believe, yesterday to pick him up, and if they can add him to Khalil Lockett, it's going to be a really, really good duo they build out there in Austin. So definitely a big-time commitment there to watch. And then you have a couple of offensive linemen and defensive linemen that I want you to watch over the next little bit. David Sanders Jr., a very, very talented kid, someone that sounds like he's going to make his decision here pretty soon. On Saturday at 12:30, he's going to make his decision, and a number of schools are in this one, whether it's Georgia, Nebraska, Ohio State, Tennessee. All of those teams are very much in this battle, and frankly, I don't know if anyone has a good idea of where this thing is going, but it sounds like Tennessee has somewhat of an inside track. I think Nebraska is not one to sleep on by any means. Ohio State is always willing to make some things happen in the recruiting trail, and Georgia is always going to be a problem. But right now, it looks like Tennessee might have the slight edge, and we're coming pretty close to that decision being made. So it could be that it totally changes by the time Saturday comes around. But right now, my pick would be Tennessee. Also, EUEC Epinesa is someone I want to talk about. AJ Epinesa's brother, a very talented edge rusher who's now on the Bills. Well, he's got a 5-star brother who's going to be an absolute monster. It sounds like Utah and Miami have a lot of momentum in this one, or at least did throughout spring and summer. It sounds like Iowa's making up some ground, and I'm sure his brother AJ absolutely loves that. A very, very talented kid, one that if Iowa was able to pick up, would just be an absolute monster pretty much from day one, like his brother was. But at the end of the day, I think this one is totally wide open. I think a number of teams can make some things happen. Penn State is another one to watch here. If I had to make a pick, I'd probably pick one of those two teams from the get-go, Utah or Miami, but overall, this one still has a number of twists and turns that are going to come into play, no doubt about that. And then finally, you have Andrew Babalola, a very talented offensive lineman. It sounds like he wants to make a decision very soon. He's still kind of figuring out where he wants to go, but it sounds like he wants a decision in before his high school season starts, or at least gets really fully underway. So definitely one to watch over the next couple of weeks, maybe a week or two. Definitely one that could come through the pipes, and I think Michigan is the one that is sitting in really good shape here. They feel like they are in really good shape where the academics are a huge thing for him, so he got a crystal ball to Stanford a little bit ago. They've fallen off quite a bit in this recruitment, but Michigan's right there, right? A very, very good academic school, one that can definitely flaunt that over some other schools that are in this recruitment. I think Auburn and Oklahoma feel good about where they sit. Definitely some teams to watch, but I'd lean Michigan right now. And Stanford, as I talked about, has waned quite a bit in this recruitment. So definitely a thing to watch. Yeah, I think, Anthony, I think there's always a question, right? You never really know who to trust. You never want to say anything until it comes out of the kid's mouth, right? And all of the thing that, especially in the world of NIL, things change very quickly. I think we all understand that, but Steve Wiltfong tends to be at least the most right of the people that put on these predictions throughout the year, and frankly, I would love if they wouldn't put in predictions, just let the kid make his decision, but I'll use him for the time being. I do think he does a really, really good job for the most part. Obviously, there are those crazy circumstances like Travis Hunter choosing Jackson State that get a little bit off the walls, but overall, I think there are a number of things that Steve Wiltfong knows about the recruiting world that is really hard to know. So I do think I lean a little bit more towards him than really anyone else, but at the end of the day, it is just a prediction. It is just up in the air, and with the world of college football today, things can change on a dime. I think we all understand that. So definitely something to watch where I just gave you a lot of different tidbits. Maybe they're all wrong at the end of the day, but definitely will be something to watch as we head into this really crazy month of August in the recruiting world. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for all of the content and updates you could possibly need. We have really incredible people doing awesome work across every single sport you could possibly want. So definitely will be an incredible year of college football, but an incredible year for everything. So anything you need in the world of sports, come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.